Hello and welcome to our lecture today on the Aranyaka, the Virata, and the Udyoga Parvans of the Mahabharata. I will go through and tell you what those words mean. So I've entitled this lecture, Gearing Up, Exile, Disguise, and Battle Preparations in the Mahabharata. We are on our way now. We are in the main story. So a few general words about the Mahabharata. It's been told many times. In fact, it's been published in English quite a few times. The first time I saw it, sort of a big English version of it that was really popular, is a book called The Five Brothers, which was published in the 1950s and was actually used in American schools quite a bit. The way most people encounter the Mahabharata through reading, though, is through the Amar Chitakata comic books that you see here on the right. Those are published in Hindi and in English, and they're really lovely. I'd like to get a nice bound copy of them at some point, but they're really great sort of comic book tellings of the epics. There was a novel that came out by Shashi Tharoor, who is a prominent Indian politician, as well as being a novelist, called The Great Indian Novel, in which he tells the story of the Mahabharata, but he has all of the characters be sort of contemporary political figures like Gandhi and Nehru and whatnot in the history of India. There was a really important Hindi movie called Kali Yuga, after Kali Yuga, the age of degeneration. There was this Hindi movie called Kali Yuga that folk are always telling me about. I have yet to see it, but I've seen parts of it, that tells the story of the Mahabharata, but tells it from the setting of a large Indian corporation, a giant business. And all of the characters in the Mahabharata are characters vying for power in a large business. So our story here that we're really looking at is just the main narrative, the story of the conflict between the sons of the Pandu, the Pandavas, and the clan of the Kurus, or the Kauravas. Now, the stories that are the main narrative is the story of the Pandavas and Kauravas, and that's what we're really looking at. But there are a ton of other story cycles in the Mahabharata, such as the story of Yayati, Nala and Damayanti. There's a number of sort of big chunks of stories that are also in there. There's also a little mini Ramayana called the, what's it called again? It's called the Upakyanam. So the tiny Ramayana, the tiny story of the Ramayana is also found in there. And I'll mention one story out of there today. Also, so the thing that characterizes, and I'm sure you've realized this now, is that the story has all of these characters that have sort of intricate and interconnected relationships, sort of like the, and this is the hallmark of all these adaptations, is it shows the complexities of families and connections. So there's a joke in Hindi that if you tell like a really long, like convoluted story, somebody will say to you, in Hindi, they'll say, what's the point of this Mahabharata you set out before me? When we're looking here, we can find a lot of interesting information. So in the main narrative, we can find all sorts of stuff about religion, society, and sexuality. But if we look at the side narratives, we find even more. I took a seminar one time in which we actually read the translation that we're reading right now. And our assignment was to just read that for the first day. And we came back and we talked about the main narrative. And then we never went back to the main narrative. We studied sort of all of the side narratives for 10 weeks and didn't go back to the stories of the Pandavas and the Kauravas. So the text is sort of a rich window into the tensions between Kshatriyas, the warrior class, and Brahmanas, sort of the priestly caste. We also see interesting stuff about, here in this text, what we read today, we'll read about the beginning of pilgrimages, different types of worship. We read about different social structures, and we actually see a fair amount about gender and sexuality. All right, so let's get into it. We are starting with the Aranyaka Parvan. That means the forest book. You may remember that we had a genre of Vedic text called the Aranyakas. Once again, the forest texts. So right off the bat, and what I'm going to do today in this lecture is I'm going to tell you or retell or highlight some sort of key stories, and it'll be up to you to, of course, ferret out the rest of it from the readings and from the videos. So the Pandavas have gone into the forest, but who's come along with them? Well, they have a full retinue, including quite a few Brahmins. Now, remember that our Pandavas are righteous kings, and they would have ritual careers of their own. They would be doing Agni Stomas and Ashwamedhas and Agni Chayanas. So because they have all these Brahmins with them, Yudhishthira gets really worried. He's like, how am I going to feed all these Brahmins? Because part of having a Brahmin retinue is you feed them, you take care of them. They do the rituals, you take care of their sort of material lives. Well, Yudhishthira is advised by his own priest, Daumya. Now, this priest is his Purohita. The Purohita is the main priest for a king, but that Purohita priest is also their main advisor on politics, sometimes even medicine, but they're also the ones who advise on and purvey magical services to the king. So Daumya, Yudhishthira's Purohita, says, you need to worship Surya using this specific mantra. So what do we see? But we see that Yudhishthira goes and stands in the water, stares up at the sun, and the text actually says he engages in yoga. Now, this wouldn't be the yoga of bendy body positions that we see in every strip mall. The yoga at this time would be a mental yoga of restraint and focus. While engaging in this yoga, staring at the sun and standing in water, he chants this mantra to Surya, the god of the sun. Now, Surya comes forth and gives him a golden bowl. He says that this bowl will always be filled. So what he then does, what Yudhishthira then does, he gives the bowl to Draupadi, and she is able to, out of just this one small bowl of food, no matter how much she pulls out of it, there's more and more. So she's able to feed all the Brahmanas, then all the brothers, then Yudhishthira eating last, and then her eating the remainings of the food. This is typical of an Indian or a Hindu custom when it comes to dining, that you feed your guests and your Brahmins first, then you feed yourself, and then the wife eats the remains of the food at the end. And also, intriguingly, with Hinduism, they don't like to eat leftovers. These uchishta, these leftovers, literally leftovers, the remainders of a meal, it's thought that it is not good to eat a meal or heat up a meal after it's been served once. There's a lot of reasons for that. Maybe we'll go into it a little bit later. Okay, so we have to remember our Pandava pals, the boys, are out in the wilderness. Now we remember that the wilderness is not only a place of danger, but it is a place of great wisdom, and it is a place of great opportunity. Arjuna realizes that, one, he needs adventure, and two, he's going to need magical weapons ahead of time. All of the brothers Pandava are going to need magical weapons in order to combat against the Kauravas, who will also have magical weapons. So Arjuna's wandering in the wilderness, and he's going to various holy places, but he's also encountering people. Remember, the wilderness is filled with yakshas, or demons, ascetics of all sorts, and even gods, sometimes even gods in human forms. So Shiva has disguised him, the god Shiva has disguised himself as a hunter, a Kirata. Now, both he and Arjuna call dibs while shooting at a boar. They shoot their arrows at the same time. Shiva comes forward dressed as a Kirata. Arjuna doesn't know who he is and says, hey, why'd you shoot my boar? I shot that boar first. That was mine. And Arjuna says, no, I shot that boar, and I'm going to mess with you on this. So they start fighting and start shooting arrows at one another. And Shiva's like, wow, this guy's really good. And Arjuna thinks, who is this guy I'm fighting against? He's tough as nails. He's got some magic arrows. Could it be that this is Indra? Could it be that this is a Yaksha? Could it even be Rudra? Now he says Rudra here. That's interesting. Rudra is a god from the Vedas, and his name means something like the howler. He howls out in the wilderness. Later in time, Rudra is sort of sucked up and condensed into becoming Shiva. But Arjuna gets the sense that this terrible being out in the woods could be this very scary god, Rudra. Eventually, they fight hand to hand, and Shiva knocks Arjuna down. At this point, Shiva's really happy with everything that's happening. He says, you know what? Let's be pals. So Shiva gives Arjuna the Pashupata weapon. Pashupata means Lord of Beast. The Pashupata, or Pashupati, is another name for Shiva, the Lord of the Beasts. So after this combat, they make nice, and Shiva gives Arjuna this incredible magical weapon. We will see that all of these weapons will be really important in sort of balancing and imbalancing power when it comes to the Great War that we'll see in the next lesson. So Arjuna continues to wander around in the wilderness, and he, in fact, at this time, even fights and meets with Indra and becomes pals with him too. Indra gives Arjuna his most dreadful weapon, his Vajra, his lightning bolt. Now, remember that while the Pandavas are sort of out there doing their thing, they are meeting with ascetics. They're studying, they're training in weaponry, they're getting stronger, they're getting better. Yudhishthira even becomes a master at the science of gambling. Boy, I wish he'd done that sooner. So one interesting thing we see is that while Arjuna is off doing his wanderings in the forest and going on pilgrimage, the other boys go on pilgrimages as well. They wander around and they go to sacred rivers and mountaintops. And when we look at the geography here, we see the beginnings of pilgrimage routes that are used even to this day. However, when we track the Mahabharata with writing from Jainism and Buddhism, we see that the places that the boys are going on pilgrimage are pilgrimage sites that were established by Jains and Buddhists, by the Shramanas. We actually see that the Hindus take up the pilgrimage structure and sacred geography of the Shramanas, but cast it in a uniquely Hindu manner. So while they're out on pilgrimage, the boys look up and they see Arjuna come flying by on Indra's chariot. Arjuna wants to show off the cool weapons he's got, but the various gods come forward and say, whoa, baby, don't cast those weapons unless you are in dire need and you're in battle. We're going to note, however, that you have to use the weapons when appropriate, but that these weapons will be used to balance and imbalance all of the combat and all of the events that we'll see in the great war that is to come. But all is not safe out in the wilderness where the Pandavas are living happily in exile, not interacting with anyone other than gods and ascetics. They're not interacting with any kings and whatnot. So Karna, you may remember, he's the charioteer of the Kauravas, and Duryodhana, the main bad guy, the oldest of the Kauravas, decide that they want to go to the forest, find the Pandavas, and gloat, and if they find them in a weakened state, conquer them. Now, their father, Dhritarashtra, says this is not the right thing to do. But over time, they keep pressuring him, and he says, all right, fine, go do it. We're going to see this pattern often of Duryodhana and Karna doing really kind of shitty things and violating the rules of conduct and being just sneaky and sketchy. So the Kauravas, they get all their, Duryodhana and Karna get their whole army together, and they head out to the forest. Unfortunately, on the way, they are blocked. They are blocked by the Gandharvas. Now, what's a Gandharva? Gandharva means smell eater. So think of it this way. In the universe of the Hindus, there are tons and tons of entities at all sorts of different levels. The Gandharvas are heavenly. They live in the sky. They're known to be celestial musicians, to play beautiful music and to exist on sensual experiences. They eat the tasty smells of food that are cooked. So these Gandharvas come down in an army and start fighting with the Kauravas. And why do they do this? We'll see in a minute. Now, like I said, these are celestial musicians, but they're also fierce warriors. Think of these as being like the yakshas and the rakshasas that we've met so far, except they're a little more refined. They're more like angels, if you will, if the other characters are more like demons. The Gandharvas end up capturing Karna, Duryodhana, and Dushasana. Remember, this is our three bad dudes. If you threw Shakuni in there, the guy who cheats at dice, then you'd have all four of the worst people in the story. Anyway, so Karna, the charioteer, Duryodhana, the mean older brother, the bad older brother of the Kauravas, and Dushasana, who was the guy who taunted and tried to disrobe Draupadi, they are captured by the Gandharvas. Now, Yudhishthira hears what's gone on, and he sends his four brothers, but not himself, off to negotiate for the release. They try to negotiate with the Gandharvas, but it doesn't work out, and battle occurs. Eventually, Arjuna and the king of the Gandharvas begin battling, and Arjuna is able to smash the king of the Gandharvas club with his bow. And at this point, the Gandharva king's like, hey, you're a pretty good guy. You're pretty powerful. Let's be pals. So they make peace. And the Gandharva king says, hey, look, we captured these guys because we knew they were coming out to mess with you. We knew they were coming out to start stuff. So eventually, Yudhishthira commands the king of the Gandharvas to let them alone, to let the three bad dudes out. And actually, Indra comes forward and sees all the Gandharvas that have been killed and brings them all back to life. Easy peasy. Now, before Duryodhana takes off to go back home, Yudhishthira tells him, hey, don't be so rash. Don't act out of anger and don't do these sneaky things because it's not going to end well for you. We will see that these pleas fall on faint ears. All right, now we're on to the next book, the Virata Parvan. Now, Virata is a king, and we will see that the Pandavas, who are required by their lost bet that they go into exile for 12 years, and then on the 13th year, they have to dwell in a kingdom in disguise. So they come to Virata, well, actually, they come to a town, or they come to a kingdom called Matsya, which means fish. So they come to the fish kingdom, the Matsya kingdom, that's ruled over by a king named Virata. Virata likes them quite a bit. He takes them all on, but they're in disguise. So he hires Yudhishthira to be his Brahmin advisor, but also to be a gambler. So he's a gambler in the court. How ironic is this, that Yudhishthira is a gambler, but he's also disguised as a Brahmin. To this, we see that, in fact, Dhritarashtra, blah, blah, blah. In fact, Yudhishthira, because he's a Brahmin, also becomes a close advisor to the king. Becomes a little like a Purohita. Again, you may remember that word Purohita before. We had the story of Rishajanas. You remember that he was the charioteer to the king and the Vedas. He was a charioteer to a king, and the king was like, hey, let's go fast. And Rishajanas was steering. He's like, whoa, we're going too fast. And they ran over a little Brahmin boy. And the king accuses Rishajanas of murder. And Rishajanas, in order to get satisfaction, has to use magic to bring the little boy back to life. So again, charioteers as Brahmins, who are Purohitas. Purohita is the sort of chief military, magical, and political advisor to the king, but also a religious servant to the king. So Yudhishthira is basically working as a gambler and a Purohita to the king. Bhīṣma becomes a cook. He's disguised. There's a great line in the movie that we're going to watch that says he's the master of 3,000 sauces. So Bhīṣma is also a wrestler. This is kind of on point for Bhīṣma. But the idea of any of these guys being laborers in any sense, it would be unthinkable. I mean, these are heroic rulers. Now, what I think is the most interesting disguise is Arjuna. He has disguised himself as a non-sexed figure. The word here is kliba or napunsaka, which means neuter. Napunsaka means neuter, like the grammar tense of neuter. And a kliba is like a eunuch. We have these characters still to this day in India called hijras. Now, these are men that dress as women, and they perform in villages. Sometimes they are prostitutes. Often they are prostitutes. But they are also greatly feared, for it is thought that their curse can really mess you up. So I remember the first time I was in India, I was on a train and I was reading a book, and I hear Hindi singing, and I look up and it's some of these hijras. I'd heard of them and I knew, don't look at them. The reason you don't want to look at them is because if you look at them and they do something funny and you smile and you don't give them money, then they'll curse you. So I'm sitting there trying to read a book, and the next thing I know, they're slapping on my book and singing like Hindi songs, and they start like poking at me, and I'm like, I'm not going to look at you. I'm not going to look at you. I'm not going to give you money. But it was kind of funny and all, but I kept it together. But a friend of mine has always said, it's like, do whatever you do, if you look at them, don't laugh, because if they do something funny and you don't give them money, they will curse you. So Arjuna has disguised himself as a non-gendered person, or a male who is dressing often as a female, and he is teaching dance and music in the king's course. Nakula, one of the Ashwins, is the horse trainer. Sahadeva is the keeper of the cows. So that makes perfect sense with them as Ashwins. Draupadi disguises herself as a hairdresser. She disguises herself as a woman in a bad way, a sort of pariah who is a widow. And we will see that hijinks will ensue on that in just a minute. Okay. So so Virata quite likes these people. He quite likes the 5 brothers in disguise and Draupadi, so he hires them all. Before the Pandavas actually go into their complete disguise to work for Virata, they hide all of their battle standards, or their flags that they would have on their chariots they would carry into battle, and all of their weapons, divine and otherwise, they hide in the Shami tree. This Shami tree is found in a cremation ground. Now, tree worship in India is often really connected to yakshas. So there is sort of a connection between the tree, the weapons, and the divine protectors of the weapons there. In fact, we see when they retrieve the weapons later, they do a worship to the tree. And I would argue that they're worshiping a yaksha who was living in that tree and protected their weapons while they were in hiding. Now, problems ensue. When Draupadi was hired, the king's queen said, I don't know, you're so fair and lovely. Remember, she is the most beautiful woman in the world. You're so fair and lovely. I worry that my king, my husband, will become infatuated with you. Now, Draupadi's like, look, don't worry about it. I'm actually married to 5 Gandharvas. Remember the Gandharvas again, they're kind of scary. I'm married to 5 Gandharvas. Well, there's this character named Kṛṣṇa. He is actually the brother of the queen, and he gets all excited about Draupadi. Now, the queen knows that Draupadi has said, I have these 5 Gandharva husbands, and if anybody tries to put the moves on me, it'll be the last thing they do. Oddly, the queen tries to help out her brother, Kṛṣṇa, who's trying to attempt Draupadi. But she knows Draupadi said that she's got these invisible husbands who will kill everybody. So it makes it ambiguous. Like, is she trying to get her brother killed, or does she just not believe Draupadi? These types of stories and ambiguities are common in the Mahabharata. In fact, whereas you see in the Ramayana, the notion of dharma is very clear. Here, dharma is situational. People do things that you wouldn't expect based on their situation, like help your brother try to seduce these servant women in your retinue. I don't know what's going on here between Kṛṣṇa and his sister, but I think it's up to no good. Also, now Kṛṣṇa is also one of Virata's main sort of military commanders. Anyway, what's going on here? Well, Kṛṣṇa makes a couple of attempts, and Draupadi rebuffs him and says, hey, I'm married, and I am married to these 5 Gandharvas, and what you're up to is going to cause your death. Well, the queen helps Kṛṣṇa out and arranges for Draupadi to go to his quarters and fetch her some wine from him. When she gets there, Kṛṣṇa says, don't worry about it. I'll send this other servant girl with this wine. You and me, stick around. Everything's gonna be great. So he basically tries to seduce her and doesn't do very well. She says no and runs off. He chases after her, grabs her by the hair, kicks her in the legs, and knocks her down. Yudhishthira and Bhīṣma actually see this happening, but don't do anything. Draupadi doesn't tell anybody who she is. She goes to the king and she says, this happened. This Kṛṣṇa is a bad dude. And the king says, I don't know. This is all he said, she said. How do I know what really happened? I can't help you out. At this point, Draupadi returns to her quarters and she tells Bhīṣma what had happened. She and Bhīṣma conspire to meet Kṛṣṇa at night. Kṛṣṇa comes to her quarters now and says, hey, the king didn't help you, so I, Kṛṣṇa, am your new ruler. Eventually, Bhīṣma sneaks in, snatches him up, and just tears him to pieces, breaks every bone in his body, leaves his body there. In the morning, people find Kṛṣṇa, who's just basically a balled up lump of flesh, and they say, whoa, that Draupadi really does have a Gandharva for a husband. No human being could do this to another human being. So the Gandharva must be real. All right. We have a couple more big events in this here book. Now, Kṛṣṇa has been killed, and he was to some degree in cahoots with the Kauravas. The Kauravas find out that Kṛṣṇa has been killed, so they decide to attack Virata's kingdom of Matsya. Again, it's an opportunistic attack. These Kauravas, every time they sense that there's some weakness around, they go after people. They're very aggressive and somewhat against sort of the Geneva Convention of pre-medieval India. So anyway, this is at the end of the 13th year that the Pandavas are supposed to be in exile. The brothers are, in fact, armed by the king as the Kauravas begin to attack. Virata says, all right, you guys go out and fight. Now, this is kind of interesting. The Pandavas right away are able to prevent the Kauravas from looting everything in the city. However, what happens is the king has a son who's very bold, and Virata's son really believes that he can go out there and he can be like Arjuna and he can mess those Kauravas up. However, Draupadi arranges for Arjuna. Remember, he's still dressed as a woman and a dance instructor. Draupadi figures out this way to get this young prince to have Arjuna as his charioteer. They go into battle, and the prince becomes very, very afraid. And Arjuna says to him, "Look here, young man, you are Kshatriya. You're a warrior. You go into battle. You are not dictated by your emotions. You have to fight." But the young boy is still very scared. Arjuna comforts him enough and says, "Look, here's the deal. You be my charioteer. I'll go into battle, but you'll drive the truck." Now, remember this, because a very similar thing will happen in the story of the Bhagavad Gita, in which Arjuna will want to go into battle, and he says, "Nope, I can't do it. I'm afraid." And Kṛṣṇa tells him the same thing that Arjuna just told this young prince. Anyway, Arjuna and the prince go into battle after retrieving their weapons. When he retrieves all the weapons from the Shami tree, that's when the young prince realizes it's Arjuna. But Arjuna's like, "Shh, don't tell anybody." So they go into battle, and they open a big old can of whoop butt, and it's powerful. It's potent. In fact, Arjuna blows his conch horn at the beginning of battle to signal his presence, and everybody's like, "Oh, crap, that's Arjuna. Things are gonna go poorly." Drona, who was the main teacher of the Pandavas and the Kauravas, knows that it must be Arjuna. Duryodhana knows it's Arjuna, and he's thrilled because he thinks that 13 years are up. So if the boys are revealed at this point, they'll have to go into exile for another 12 years. Later, we'll see that Bhīṣma will explain that according to astrology, the 13 years have been up for about 4 or 5 months. So the Pandavas have done their time. Arjuna recaptures all of the cattle and all the wealth that was plundered, and he even injures Karṇa as they're fighting during this battle. They come back victorious, and Virata is very happy that his son was brave. But Yudhishthira says the boy was always safe because of the charioteer being there. The king is angered that this eunuch, this dance teacher, could be a powerful warrior, and it must be his son that's powerful. And he punches Yudhishthira right in the face. So soon the son returns and sees Yudhishthira bleeding after his father had punched him, and says, "Hey, look, this eunuch is one bad hombre. So you need to make amends to that Brahmin you just struck." Still, nobody talks about the true identity. 2 days later, the 5 brothers dress in white cotton with all of their royal symbolism, and they come forward into the court. Virata sees them and asks their identities, and the brothers reveal their true identities. Virata is thrilled. He even grants one of his daughters to Arjuna to marry. Arjuna says, though, he's like, "I can't marry this gal. I mean, I've been her dance teacher for a year. I think of her as my daughter, so I'll give her to my son, Abhimanyu." You'll remember that Abhimanyu is the last and only survivor at the end of the Great War, the only Kshatriya who makes it other than the 5 brothers. All right, so now we're on to the last book for today, the Udyoga Parvan. Udyoga means something like exercise, endeavor, or preparation. So I like to translate the Udyoga Parvan to be preparations for war. Now, they're going to try diplomacy. Abhimanyu has his marriage ceremony, and all the kings are coming together. Everybody's hanging out, and everybody kind of talks about how the Kauravas are sketchy as heck. But when they really get to talking, they decide it's best to try to do diplomacy, but at the same time, they need to prepare for war. So how do these war alliances get set up? Well, first off, Arjuna and Duryodhana need to figure out where Kṛṣṇa stands. So they go out to Dwarka in the west of India. That's where Kṛṣṇa lives. And we get to one of my favorite stories in the Mahabharata. Both of them want the allegiance of Kṛṣṇa. So Duryodhana gets there first, and he sits down, finding Kṛṣṇa asleep on a bed, and he sits down at the head of Kṛṣṇa's bed by Kṛṣṇa's head. Arjuna gets there second, and he finds Kṛṣṇa asleep as well, and he sits at Kṛṣṇa's feet. Both of them will not wake Kṛṣṇa. They let Kṛṣṇa slumber. And when Kṛṣṇa wakes, he looks, and the first thing he sees at his feet is Arjuna. And he says, "All right, I will give you the choice of the choice he's about to give him. I will give you the choice of my alliance." And Duryodhana gets pissy as always and says, hey, I was here first. And Kṛṣṇa says, but when I opened my eyes, I saw my dear friend Arjuna. Both of you are dear to me. I will not make a choice. So here's the deal. I'm not going to fight, but you have a choice to make. You can have my army of my 10 million battle-ready shock troops, tough as nails. If it's Kṛṣṇa's army, it's going to be the toughest, best army in the world. Or you can have me, and I won't fight, and I'll be by your side in all of this conflict, and I'll advise you, but I will not fight in any way. Arjuna looks, and without even thinking says, I choose you, Kṛṣṇa, because I love you. I choose you because of my friendship. Duryodhana crows in the air, so happy because he's got like the baddest ass army in the world now. They both leave happy. But the thing is, Arjuna made a pretty good choice, as we're going to see. So again, remember I was talking about Purohitas. We'll see that Kṛṣṇa is going to end up being the charioteer for Arjuna when he goes into battle. In this sense, Kṛṣṇa is acting like a Purohita. He's going to drive the chariot. He's going to advise him on all religious concerns. He's going to advise him on all of the magical concerns and the ethical concerns and the political concerns. But again, there's a trick here because Kṛṣṇa ain't no Brahmin. Kṛṣṇa is a Kshatriya. He's a warrior, but he's acting like a Brahmin. So there's some hugger-mugger here about how people are behaving. Now we get to the confusing and frustrating negotiations that occur in the build-up to the war. Diplomacy kind of breaks down. There's a lot of back and forth. Dhritarashtra begs Duryodhana, Dhritarashtra is his father, begs him for peace, and Duryodhana denies it. Duryodhana makes all sorts of arguments. He argues that because they weren't in exile long enough, that they have to go for another 12 years, which Bhīṣma has already said is wrong. He also argues that they gambled away their kingdom, and everyone has already said, yeah, that was wrong. You tricked them, and you should really restore their kingdom to them. Yeah, so Duryodhana is just making all sorts of arguments. And eventually, he has all of his advisors, Bhīṣma, Drona, Dhritarashtra, even Kṛṣṇa, which we'll see, advising that he cannot win in battle. However, Karṇa and Dushasana, Karṇa, the bad guy, not Pandava, but Pandava, remember he is the incarnation of the sun and is effectively one of the brothers of the Pandavas. Eventually, Karṇa and Dushasana, the guy who disrobed Draupadi, and Shakuni, the gambling cheater, they say, hey, we can win. We can make this happen. Bhīṣma tells them, even after this, like, you cannot win. This is not going to work out. So eventually the Pandavas say, look, give us 5 villages. We don't even need our kingdom. Give us 5 villages. We're Kshatriyas, we're rulers. We need artha. We need wealth. We need to have, places to rule. That's who we are. Without wealth, and without subjects, we'll just shrivel up and die. We won't be able to make it. Without power, fish eat fish, they say. It's like the law of the jungle. Kṛṣṇa says, all right, I'm going to go on your behalf and I'm going to reason with these guys. So Kṛṣṇa shows up. Everybody's really happy to see him. And he's greeted by Duryodhana, but we find out that Duryodhana actually wants to kidnap him, which is a really bad idea. In fact, everybody he tells his plan to says, don't try to kidnap Kṛṣṇa. This is gonna go poorly. Kṛṣṇa starts negotiating with Duryodhana, stating that, but Duryodhana really rejects it. Duryodhana says that when Kṛṣṇa explains this whole situation, all the sin is on his parts and on the part of the Kauravas, not on the part of the Pandavas. Now, Kṛṣṇa gets pissed off. He's like, the Pandavas haven't done anything to you. You've been awful to them. Kṛṣṇa is just enraged. And he says, look, you cheated the Pandavas. You did not stop the ill treatment of Draupadi. In fact, you were the guys that did it. And you tried to kill the Pandavas on several occasions. Remember when they built the fire trap house and tried to kill them? Eventually, Kṛṣṇa says, if you guys don't make peace right now, you're all going to be killed. Duryodhana storms out. Now, thinking that everyone is against him and that Kṛṣṇa is going to get Dhritarashtra and Drona and all of the other Kauravas to work against him, Duryodhana decides that he is going to kidnap Kṛṣṇa. Now, Vidura, the good uncle, hears about this and warns Dhritarashtra. And Dhritarashtra says to Duryodhana that this is not going to end out well. They try anyway to kidnap Kṛṣṇa, and Kṛṣṇa manifests a divine form. We're going to see him do this again too, when it comes to the section called the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of the Lord. So he reveals himself, and we read, when Vidura has finished speaking, Kṛṣṇa said to Duryodhana, "O Duryodhana, since out of your folly you suppose me to be alone, you think you can effect my capture by overpowering me." So saying, he laughed out loud. And at his laughter, the body of the great souled one became like lightning. He becomes like energy. From his body issued forth gods, only as big as the thumb, but bright as rays of fire. Brahma was found on his brow, Rudra, Rudra on his breast. On his arms appeared the regents of the earth, so the guardians of all the directions. And from his mouth issued the god of fire. So this is going to be scary as heck. When Kṛṣṇa thus showed himself on the floor of the assembly hall, celestial drums were sounded, and there was a shower of flowers everywhere. And at this point, Kṛṣṇa's like, I'm out. Screw you guys. I am leaving. But before he goes, he stops and talks to Karṇa. What does he have to say? Other than, yeah, what does he have to say? After thwarting the worst plan of kidnapping ever, Kṛṣṇa goes to Karṇa, and this is like his last ditch effort. He says, look, I know how you were born. In fact, your brothers are the Pandavas. Kunti even comes forward, his mother, and tells the story about how she used this mantra to get a child by Surya, and then hid him in the riverbank in a basket, and then the charioteer's family found him and adopted him. Kṛṣṇa even says, look, man, it's better than you think. Your brothers will accept you. I know this, and they would have. Will accept you. You will rule with them. Guess what, buddy? You also get Draupadi. You get to be the sixth brother. You get to be married to the hottest woman who has ever existed. Karṇa looks, and I love Karṇa. Karṇa looks and says, Mother, you've shown me no kindness. Kṛṣṇa, what have you done for me now? I had nothing, and Duryodhana adopted me and gave me a kingdom and allowed me to act as I am, a Kshatriya. You guys didn't help me. I have to be loyal to the one who helped me. I will always be loyal to Duryodhana, who has been an actual brother to me when he adopted me. I mean, also, this is some BS, because Kunti and Kṛṣṇa knew all of this all along, and they didn't do anything for Karṇa. But now they come to him and make this offer. That's weak tea. All right, we're rounding toward the end of the lecture here. Now, there are some conditions for battle. So, for instance, and these stories will come up later. We will see the implications of this. There's a king named Shalya who really loves the Pandavas, and he's on his way to go fight with them. But all along the way, people have set up these great rest stops and been really hospitable and really wonderful. And eventually he runs into Duryodhana, who says, all this like food and stuff I left out for you all along your way, that's been from me. And Shalya says, hey, all right, what do you want? I'm really pleased by you with what you've done for me. And he says, fight with me. And he goes, crap. So he goes to Kṛṣṇa, and Kṛṣṇa says, it's all right. Go fight with the Kauravas. It's fine, Shalya. Now, you are probably the best charioteer around. So I'm sure that when Karṇa fights Arjuna, you will be the charioteer for Karṇa. When this happens, and I want you to be loyal to the Kauravas up to this point, during this one battle, I ask that you do one thing, and that's protect Arjuna. So in this one-on-one combat, this chariot battle, take care of Arjuna and betray Karṇa. And Shalya agrees. Bhīṣma, who is the great wizened one we're going to read about, we'll get more of him in just a second. Bhīṣma says he will not fight. He will not fight after Karṇa. He will not fight after Karṇa. The deal is that Karṇa and Bhīṣma have been kind of in battle for a long time, and Karṇa thinks that he's as powerful as Bhīṣma. Bhīṣma says, you know what? I'll go into battle, but I'm not going with Karṇa. After I've died, or after I've left, or after I've quit, then Karṇa can go in. Now, don't get me wrong. I will kill 10,000 warriors every day by myself. So he's a tough guy. Balarama, who's the older brother of Kṛṣṇa, actually says, look, I am not going to watch these people kill each other. My dear disciples who I've trained in using the clubs are Duryodhana and Bhīṣma, and I will not watch them kill one another. But the biggest story that we need to go over is the story of Bhīṣma and Shikandi. This will lead to one of the biggest upsets in the war, and it's my last story for the day. Remember that Bhīṣma, at the beginning of the Mahabharata, had won several wives in a contest, and he gave them to his half-brother because he had taken a vow of celibacy, saying that he would never marry and he would never rule. There was one woman named Ambā that he had won, and she pleaded with him, and he said, you know what? All right, I'll let you go. So he lets her go back to the man that she originally loved. But this king didn't want her. He said she had been won by another, so he didn't want her anymore. He expels her and she goes into the forest. She lives in the forest amongst the ascetics, and over time she meets someone named Bharashurama. Now this is intriguing. There's an ascetic named Bharashurama. Bharashurama means Rama with an axe. This is another incarnation of Vishnu. Bharashurama was an incarnation of Vishnu with an axe, who was a great warrior, and some Kshatriyas killed his mother. So, and some stories say his father. So he gets pissy and he kills every Kshatriya in existence. He, in fact, drains lakes and fills them up with the blood of Kshatriyas. So he's known to be like one of the toughest guys in the universe and has incredible magic weapons. Now, she tells her story. Ambā tells her story to Bharashurama. And he says, this Bhīṣma is going to get slain, even if I got to get him. He's going to get got, even if I got to get him. So Bharashurama later ends up meeting Bhīṣma. And he says, you got to marry this Ambā woman. And Bhīṣma says, no way, I'm celibate. I took my vow. So they fight. They each deploy the Brahma Astra, a magical weapon that cancels each other out. It's like the weapons freeze in the air, scattering sparks everywhere, and things are going nuts. So they're basically at a draw. At this point, Bhīṣma pulls out a weapon called the, what is the name of it again? His magical weapon is called the Prasvapa weapon, like the weapon that will make everyone sleep, or the weapon that'll kill you. So he pulls out this Prasvapa weapon, but he hears a celestial voice that says, don't. So he withdraws the weapon and they stop fighting. And Bharashurama realized, crap, he could have killed me. So we're just going to take it as a draw. At this point, he informs Ambā, I can't kill him. So you're going to have to find a way to make peace with him. Ambā says, nope. And she goes off to the forest. She performs great austerities and she meets the god Shiva. Shiva grants her a wish. And in that wish, she is reborn. She is reborn into a Kshatriya family. In fact, she's reborn as the daughter of Drupada. Now, Shiva has told Drupada, in fact, that this is the one person that will be able to kill Bhīṣma, because Drupada hates Bhīṣma as well. Drupada hates Bhīṣma, Drupada hates Drona. He has magical children in both cases to kill Bhīṣma and Drona. So what happens here? She is a girl. And Drupada is like, how can a girl kill Bhīṣma? And Shiva's like, you just need to figure that out and be cool with it. Anyway, he raises her as a boy, trains her in all sorts of weapons. She becomes a very skilled warrior, but she's pretending to be male. Eventually, she's married off. When her wife discovers her true sex, she's ashamed and she flees to the forest. While she's in the forest, she meets a yaksha named Karṇa. And what happens there? The yaksha likes her, so they agree to a gender swap. The yaksha, who is a giant beastly man, becomes female, and she becomes male. So she becomes Shikandi the male, but she is still a female. Bhīṣma took a vow at one point that the only person that could kill him would be a woman or someone who was formerly a woman. We'll see that this is just what's going to happen. Now, the king of the yakshas, named Kubera, comes and meets Stunakarma, and Stunakarma's like, I don't want to see you. And Kubera's like, you get over here. And then he finds out that Stunakarna has become a woman. He gets pissy as heck. This was supposed to be a temporary gender switch. So Kubera says, you know what? If you became a woman, you're going to stay a woman. That means Shikandi is going to stay male. However, Kubera backs off eventually, and he says, all right, once Shikandi dies, you will become male again. Your maleness will come back to you. It's interesting that maleness is something that can come and go. That's also, I find, intriguing. We are going to see that this Shikandi will be the person that kills Bhīṣma. And Bhīṣma can be killed by Shikandi because Shikandi was once a woman. All right. This is the end. Bad stuff is coming. I will catch you next time, and there will be a lot of death in our future. All right. See you soon. Bye.